Welcome back to Fast Forward, a series of interviews that invite visionaries who truly care about employee experience and well-being to delve deeper into the future of work on the front line. From manufacturing and healthcare to retail and transportation, in each episode we'll be exploring how technology, automation and other trends are shaping the way over 2.7 billion people work on the front line. My guest today is someone I feel deeply privileged to be speaking with. Gary Bolles is the current chair for the future of work at Singularity University, an innovation and transformation hub for over 250,000 CEOs, entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, and individuals. Having formerly been a Silicon Valley executive and editorial director of 6 technology publications, Gary has more recently dedicated himself to helping individuals, organizations, communities, and countries to collaborate on effective strategies that ensure all people can have access to meaningful, well-paid work and lifelong learning opportunities. An author of The Next Rules of Work, The Mindset, Skill Set, and Tool Set to Lead Your Organization Through Uncertainty book, Gary has also amassed over 1 million learners on LinkedIn Learning through attendees on his courses such as Learning Mindset, Learning Agility, and Leading Change. Welcome to Fast Forward, Gary. That's quite an introduction. It really is an honor to have you here. Would you mind sharing your journey with our listeners a little bit? Because, you know, when myself and the listeners would love to hear you went from working for the family business around 18, I think it was, as a career counselor, right to where you are now, advising some of the biggest institutions on the planet on how to solve the increasingly complex work challenges of tomorrow.
No, I really appreciate it, Lynn. So first off, thank you for the invitation. And I'm going to have to ask you to go around and make my introduction now for every single session. So that was a marvelous intro. So this puts me at a slight disadvantage when I'm speaking to the presidents of colleges and universities about the transformation of learning and education. But I was never interested in college myself. And so instead, I fell into doing a wide variety of odd jobs in my rudderless youth. But one of the businesses I fell into was the family business. It just so happens that my father was the author of, what became the world's career manual, What Color Is Your Parachute? And so I was trained in his methods of how you help individuals to go through the process of basically career reinvention, the things you do to go through thinking through your next step. And I found from that process, one of the things I loved the most was working with technology and computers. So in the early 1980s, which of course dates me, I moved to Silicon Valley and wore just about every hat you can wear, from corporate executive to serial and sometimes parallel entrepreneur. And that led to a fascination with helping people understand technology. So I became involved in the magazine business, ultimately editorial director for 6 publications. That business, as we were chronicling the rise of the internet, became a pretty poor business. So we ended up focusing a lot on strategic events, conferences, ways to bring people together to be able to understand how to change the world. And then over time, more and more, the themes that I was focused on were the future of work, the future of learning, and the future of the organization. And so those have become some of the anchors. And as you said, in the domains of individuals, organizations, communities, and countries.
It's a really interesting journey, and I think we've got limited time today, but we could probably speak for hours about each of those chapters. But in terms of sort of, what we're here to really delve into, initially I'll be very keen to sort of get your thoughts on this concept and this role of human centricity in the future of work. I mean, it feels like organizations and business leaders are really trying to reinforce much more greater and more impactful ways for people within their organizations to connect with their culture, whether that be emotionally or also through their day-to-day work experiences. But job satisfaction, is at an all-time low on the front line, especially in the likes of manufacturing, transportation. So there clearly is still a lot of work to be done before the impacts of these initiatives are being felt by those employees. Given your experience, advising on issues related to the future of work, how can organizations shift their focus to embrace a more human-centric future of work that ultimately better caters to the needs and the motivations of their frontline workers?
No, absolutely. I mean, so if you think of the history of the future of work, automation has always had a significant impact on work. But long ago when we all worked on farms or, gathered things or hunted, it wouldn't even occur to you to ask if work is human-centric because we didn't even call it work. It's what you did to live. It's what you did to thrive. And it was all humans doing it. And as we had more and more technology, automation, machines from the plow onward, what we've done is we've then said, oh, well, there's certain tasks that automation kind of does better. And the challenge is that as we shifted to industrial economies, we also automated the work roles. And so the result in a factory is you have to have lots of widgets, and the widgets have to sit at a certain level of quality. And what that does is it kind of makes you, if you're the one leading that or managing it, you kind of focus on very production-centric processes. It's almost like you're trying to make people more automated themselves. Well, fast forward to today, and that is one of the challenges, is that frontline workers often are the ones, when we say frontline, the mental vision for some people is it's almost, like in a war zone. It's like the people at the front, like in the trenches, and they're the ones that are often dealing with the customers, or they're the ones that are actually making the product. They're the ones that are getting their hands dirty. And there's a unfortunate tendency, especially as organizations scale, to want to automate all of that. And what that does is it takes an awful lot of the sort of human anchor out of the process. So when I talk to CEOs and other people who lead companies, organizations around the world, I say, well, so in any relationship, how does it work? Like if you want to know how the other person feels, how their work is going, how you can help them to empower them, and they want to be heard. And so there's a two different thing. So you might have a whole bunch of data that tells you that you can deeply automate work roles, and that can disenfranchise people because you're using your data and telling them what they need to do in their work. And then people in those work roles can be feeling like, well, you know what, I'm just a cog in a wheel. Like they could just replace me and put somebody else in. And what you need to do is you need to think about, well, what should that communication process look like? What should that dialogue look like? How can we make work roles more human? That is better for humans. How do we make sure that they're well paid, meaningful work roles? How can we make sure that they have some level of variety in them, because that's what humans thrive on? And how can we ensure that we're putting in an operating system and the way that organizations run themselves, that will continue to happen. We will continue to use technology to leverage the data to make work more human and human-centric. And that's a mindset shift. So people who lead organizations need to change the way that they even approach the problem of trying to help people to be able to have meaningful, well-paid work and make that a process of co-creation.
Yeah, I remember when we last spoke, I think we were discussing the same topic around sort of how organizations navigate those workforce asymmetries, and they're just sort of throwing automation essentially at problems, which is obviously not necessarily resolving the best solution for it, but it seems like the easiest thing to do in sort of the proliferation of AI and technologies, which must be really daunting for those workers that are sort of seeing it. It's all over the media, right? I think McKinsey had a report recently that said that they think that around 73 million jobs could be lost by 2030. Do you think that automation does pose a bigger threat for the future of work as McKinsey does, or do you think that through a lot of the stuff that you do with your consulting and your sort of lecturing, that it's more a case of educating leaders and those people that can inform change, that there is another way forward other than just throwing automation at it?
Absolutely. So one of the ways to think about this is if you think of work as sort of being on a map, and one axis of the map is how repetitive or how unique the tasks you perform are, and then another axis is how little creative thinking, like mostly just analytics or repetitive stuff, or really, really creative thinking it's pretty easy to figure out down here in the lower left where it's repetitive and it doesn't require a lot of creativity. Work is always automating. So you go back to the Luddites in 18th century England, and they used to weave. They used to be weavers, and then these new machines called loom weavers came along, and suddenly so much of that work was automated. They were just tending the machine. They weren't weaving anymore. But up here is designing and creating and coming up with what the materials are. And so there's this range of activities and skills that we use. We are always automating this lower left. The challenge is that often people who are designing it have business models that encourage you to pay people that are tending the machines less, to make the work very, very repetitive and boring, to continually use the technology to automate these skills down here. And that's one way to think about these new artificial intelligence tools and other technologies. It's not just AI, but lots of other technologies. Is, again, the mindset of the people who lead organizations has got to be, how do we keep on making that work as human as possible? And as we automate a lot of those tasks, how do we not make it where we just discard the humans that were doing those things before? Now we've got a machine or artificial intelligence software to do those tasks. And how do we help that human to be trained to do new things, to be enthusiastic about doing new things, to have a North Star or a Southern Cross that draws them in doing those new things? And rather than having this discardable worker mindset, we have the idea that humans will always be these general purpose problem solvers who can keep on solving new problems. And if the organization has an approach where that is the mindset and they're training with that next generation skill set, you'll find you're never behind the curve in having the skilled workers that you need.
Yeah, I think that digital skills gap, not just in frontline industries to be fair, but that digital skills gap across the board is something that I think that a lot of organizations are really struggling with. Obviously, you're based out in the US, I'm in the UK, and there are more jobs at the moment than there have ever been before, but the type of skills required for those jobs just isn't available on the talent market. So, yeah, definitely sort of learning and development around those sort of skills that are missing is I guess, a crucial role of business leaders to sort of close that gap.
No, it's an excellent point, but I'd also add, you have to change the way you even define the work roles, the way you write job descriptions, the way you think of the requirements, because if you only require college degrees for jobs that just don't even really need it, you just think that's going to set a bar for quality, or a certain number of years of experience, or certain licensing requirements that really don't make a ton of sense, that adds friction to the process. And so you're exactly right. You got to change that mindset, but it has to begin with the way that the work roles are defined, the ways that you seek out humans to be able to solve those problems. And you have to reduce that friction so that especially frontline workers have more options that are available to them, as opposed to only having to default to the things, the very narrow things they've been trained for. And because that then results in this sort of zero-sum mentality again by the people who lead organizations.
Totally agree with you, Gary. I know that one of your real sort of focus areas and a lot of your thinking sort of centers around how sort of building communities can really help to sort of continually develop, attract workers, strengthen sort of economic and social cohesion, and therefore make organizations more resilient. Do you perceive that, to be more of a challenge in organizations where they do have a predominance of deskless workers because of the sort of the more complexity of the ecosystem there than, say, like an office environment? And what advice would you give to business leaders in those sort of frontline industries on how to, they wanted to go about fostering resilient communities?
First off, one of the reasons I think it's so important for us to be talking about frontline workers and people that are not anchored to a desk is that, first off, it's the majority of work roles in many countries. So in the United States, it's about 60%. So so much of the rhetoric and the headlines that we see focuses on that worker with a desk, especially in knowledge work. And that's only 40% of a lot of the work roles typically. And so first off, you want to make sure you're solving for the larger group of people. Secondly, they're typically paid less. And so they typically are thought of as like the base of the pyramid. And so that's a mindset shift that they're all incredibly valuable human beings. They all have a mix of skills. They all have hopes and dreams for the future. And the more you see them, the more you understand those dynamics, and you don't treat them as the less skilled. They're often just simply they have slightly less training, or they might simply just have fewer opportunities. So that's a mindset shift as well. Secondly is how you build the cohesion between them, because what ends up happening in a lot of frontline industries, they're very shift centric, and they're very hourly centric often. And what that does is you get this mindset of somebody who leads the organization is you're just trying to plug people in the slot. Like I have to have somebody always covering the tables in a restaurant. I have to have somebody always delivering my goods if it's a truck for truckers, and I've got these slots that I have to fill. And often that process of figuring all that out is not a co-creation process with the worker. It's just, automating and stick them in it. And what that does is it can inevitably lead to the dissociation between workers. That is, you're just being plugged into these slots. You don't share your schedule or your shifts a lot of time with other people. And so that doesn't build coherence. And so what you want, ideally, is as somebody who leads an organization, I talk about membership, right? So people talk about, you want to make sure you have a diverse workforce, you're inclusive, you're all the different characteristics we think are very, very important. And the people who run organizations often want engagement, like they want you to be connected to the organization. I sort of group all that together and I talk about membership, and you can think about where you feel membership. You felt membership in your school, you felt membership in your sports team, that's where you feel a tight relationship between you and other people, and it helps to be able to foster identity. That's the mindset I urge people who lead organizations. How do you increase that feeling of membership, the actual activities around membership in that social cohesion, where it's not just you at the center of the wheel, you're the hub, communicating to each of the individual workers, but how are they interconnected? How do they feel membership with each other? And that is a set of tasks, of goals that people who lead organizations need to have so that they will get the benefits of it. You'll get people that are much more engaged in their work. You get people that are much more feeling connected to their other workers, and not so much this mindset of, hey, you know what, I could work anywhere, and if this company doesn't treat me well, then I'm just going to go drive for Uber a little bit, and then I'll go work for the next company. You need that high degree of membership in the feeling of the workers that you're working with. But that means responsibility for you as somebody who leads an organization to be able to build that infrastructure to increase membership.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Gary. And when it comes to communities, because I guess the beauty of a community is that a lot of the time they're quite organic. I've been in companies where they try and impose communities on you, right? So let's set up they don't call it community, but let's set up a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and it's sort of like coming from a top down rather than a sort of, I guess, a bottom up. And I guess within organizations, you sort of need to have that sort of alignment and equilibrium. How would you go about, how in those sort of more frontline workplaces, how do these communities tend to forge typically?
Oh, excellent question. So again, I'm going to use some of the same visuals. Is standard distribution in any organization of a large, let's say a large size organization. And up here, you've got people that are extremely engaged, deeply committed. They feel like they're very, very part of the community. And you've got people down here that feel like, you know what, it's just a job. I'm just getting a paycheck. I'll just show up. I don't feel like connected. I could leave tomorrow. And that unfortunately in a lot of organizations is an increasing percent. And so in a post-pandemic world where Many people for a while felt disconnected from their organizations and then were suddenly told, okay, now we want you again. It's perfectly understandable. That can create some challenges around feeling that connection and membership. And so there's a couple of things that first off, you have to have the finger on the pulse. You have to understand what it is. What is that mindset? How are people thinking and feeling about your organization? How involved are they? And then what you find is that people appear that have much more connection, feel much more part of it. They can actually be the ones that can be leading the process of co-creation. That is, the more enthusiastic and involved they are, and they can be the ones that can help to involve others and to keep on pulling them into the process. Anything that is, as you say, a top-down process that somebody who leads an organization imposes on the organization comes from an ineffective mindset. I won't say the wrong mindset. It's an ineffective mindset. It just doesn't get the results that you want. And so instead, you have to make sure I've got a finger on the pulse. I kind of understand. So that means surveying. It means continual conversations. It means to be able to continually tap people on the shoulders and say, I want you to be part of this process. Does this make sense to you? How could we co-create this? How could we modify this process? And then listening to them and having the workers tell you what they need. And what you find is that a lot of the mechanisms of this have to do, especially for frontline workers, and how relevant you make it to their lives. If you give them flexibility around choices for shifts, if you give them the ability to have the kind of child care support that they need, if they have the ability to use transportation that isn't costly and timely so they can get there. And these are basic blocking and tackling things. But as a community, the more the community says, these are the things we have to solve, the organization now understands, oh, okay, I thought it was just going to be, buying coffee or pizza so you guys can all come together and after your shifts are over. No. It's how can you make it relevant to the lives of the workers? How can they could be part of a process of continually increasing that relevance? That result gets you the membership that you're looking for.
Yeah, totally resonates with me, Gary. And actually that sort of touched a little bit on what I wanted to discuss with you next around sort of what I've been reading in various reports. I think one of the most interesting reports was a McKinsey report looking into sort of bridging the advancement gap and what frontline, the research was looking at what frontline employees want and what their employers think they want. And really interestingly, overall, it came out that frontline workers are more intrinsically motivated to work by drivers that are indirectly linked to pay. So career progression came out as top, so having a sense of belonging, which I guess links very nicely to the sort of the community theme we were just discussing, more so than those extrinsic sort of tangible factors. So, how can organizations strike that balance between those intrinsic motivators and intrinsic rewards to make sure they are doing the best to attract and retain a motivated workforce?
One way to think about this is if you are somebody who leads in an organization and you could wave a magic wand, what would you want? You would want every person in the organization to have a North Star or a Southern Cross that draws them in their work, things that they want to learn, skills they want to develop, a future job role they want to have. You would want them to have that pull, that magnetic draw, in the same way that sailors used to have, stars they could navigate by. You want every single person to have that motivation, because then you have the information to help them to understand when you give them market signals, when you tell them, listen, if you take these courses, you could get, move from assistant manager to manager. If you understand this work opportunity in another division in the organization where you could use your skill set and you could shift and get better pay, or you could feel like you're part of a closer part of a team, or you could have more flexible work hours, or the more you have the combination of what it is that people are drawn by, that North Star or Southern Cross. So that means helping them to do their own skills inventories, helping them to do their own career planning, having continual check-ins and support from their supervisor or manager, who doesn't think of them as a wholly owned subsidiary, but instead thinks of them as an enterprise resource that could be solving problems throughout the organization. And then the market signal. Where are the opportunities? What do we need to do to be able to develop those skills? Is the organization supporting you in the development of those skills? You have to have both. You have to help each individual to be activated, and you have to have the organization continually send really consistent and effective market signals so that the people can make decisions. They can decide, oh, you know what? I don't want to become a manager. I actually want to shift over to this other group where I can do more creative or anything like that. You need that process to be able to help make it a process of co-creation.
Yeah, I mean, I really think you said co-creation a few times today. Be able the terminology, I'd love to hear more across the board. And I mean, we talked briefly about automation, possibly more on the sort of negative, but definitely not on the sort of positive side in the context of sort of frontline workers. But what are your thoughts on the role of technology as a motivating factor, given that, again, you know, we're referring back to research. I think Meta had quite a comprehensive study that found 80% of frontline workers believe that actually their employee experiences, the positive employee experiences, will be dictated by the quality of their workplace technology. And over 50%, I think, said that they would actually move jobs if there was access to better tools and technology. So, I mean, that's quite an interesting aspect of this as well. What are your thoughts on it, Gary?
So if you're a frontline worker and you've got a range of different problems that you're solving, tasks you perform, and skills that you use, right? So this is my framing. It's, you know, work is basically human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. And there's a whole bunch of the tasks that you're doing that are really boring and they're not a lot of fun. Okay, we all have, you know, work is work. Not everything has to be great. But if what the organization is doing is giving you tools, technologies to be able to perform certain tasks that just are harder or more boring or whatever, so that you can do the other stuff that is more value added, right? If you're working in a restaurant and you have to spend hours totaling up all of your accounts and all the money and all that sort of stuff, and you don't love that, and you want to be out there with customers and interacting with them, that's the value added part. So how do you automate the stuff that's not as much fun for humans? And how do you then empower them to be able to do things that are more fun and are better value for humans to do? So that's the way to be thinking about that sort of calculus for people. So if automation is, I'm going to give you some artificial intelligence software, you're going to train that software, and then it's going to put you out of a job because you were doing call center work, and now it's, you know, the AI is going to be better at that than you are, and I don't have a job for you after this. I think everybody loses, like everybody. And instead, if you say, well, listen, you're going to train this AI software, and then you are going to be the one that is going to be continually helping to make the software better, to only be dealing with the customers with the hardest problems because you're a ninja at this stuff, then that might be a win for everybody. But that takes courageous leadership. It takes people that are committed to the training that's required. Often when you spend that money to train people, there's a propagation delay, like you don't immediately seeing them solve new problems. And so you have to have people who lead organizations that are continually pushing to automate the things that are boring for people, but then continually developing the work roles so that people can do the value-added work.
Yeah, it seems like we're a long way away from getting to that point. And like, in terms of your experience or engaging with organizations, where are they on that maturity curve of sort of, I guess, initially understanding, but then being able to sort of implement that level of change within their organization?
So there's really, really wide distribution with organizations. And I'd say it's always a work in progress because there always will be a next wave of automation. Everybody's freaking about generative artificial intelligence and large language models, LLMs now, because they look like they're so freakily good at certain things. But this happens all the time, over and over again, from that plow or that loom weaver. We freak out and we think, oh, well, all work is good. And instead, what you want is to be able to have a process by which new technologies come along. Hopefully the people that are focused on the people part of your organization, whether that's HR or the people function or a line of business, people who lead, but you have a process by which new technology comes along. You have a way to be able to understand its impact on the work roles. You are designing it so that it's all the positive impacts we're talking about. And today it's general, or today it's artificial intelligence. Tomorrow it might, but probably won't be artificial general intelligence, where the software can do virtually everything. But it might be quantum computing, where suddenly you have all of these amazing capacities to be able to automate tasks that you couldn't automate before. There will always be the next wave of technology. And so what you need as somebody who leads an organization is that process. And again, I'll use the word co-creation, where it's not just you saying, well, here's how you're going to use the tool in your work. I'm telling you exactly what the steps are going to be. You have a process where the workers are part of that, and they're determining, how could I have better workflows? How could I solve new problems? Maybe there's ways to solve problems that people who lead the organization aren't even thinking of. And if workers, especially frontline workers, are part of that process, they can always help to ensure that the work that results from it is going to be more human-centered.
That's brilliant. And actually, it may well be a very valid answer to what I'm going to ask you next, which is the sort of question that I ask all of our guests on the series. But what do you predict, or what do you hope the future of work on the front line will look like in 2040?
So first off, I don't make predictions. I don't like to make predictions. I like to talk about like the sort of the red thread, like the trends that we can talk about. So I would probably come more from the hope standpoint. First off, I'd say 2040 is not that far away, so we often have pictures in our mind of what we think moves forward would be. The internet has been around basically, for the average person, 25 to 30 years. So it seems like a long time, but it's also, it's had a transformative impact on a lot of work. But there's a lot of work it doesn't affect quite as much. And so I'd say my hopes would be that more and more organizations and workers, the way I think about it is like a table, right? And so when new technologies come along or new business models come along, the worker and the people who lead organizations, you need to have processes that continually readjust the table. So what I would want by 2040, or as part of this work in progress, is that more and more organizations put in processes where the new technology comes along and suddenly it's imbalanced. That is, there are workers that are deeply affected by it, and they're part of the process of determining how the organization is continually adapting and using those technologies. And then I would also want part of that process to be proactive. We do know a number of the technologies that are just taking a little bit longer. We know, for instance, you are going to have a lot of autonomous trucks eventually. Just don't have that many right now. And so the more proactive organizations can be and say, let's involve our frontline workers in this process. Let's make sure that the work right now is much more human. And let's make sure that they're up to speed. They understand what technologies are coming down the line. Matter of fact, they're part of the process of helping us to determine what should our approaches, our policies be. How should we be leveraging these technologies? If all of that falls into place, then in the next 10, 12 years, what you've got is 10, 17. You've got much more of this adaptive quality that organizations are going to need. So it kind of doesn't matter what the next wave of technology is. You're going to be able to rapidly adapt to it. And if you don't put these processes in place, there's going to be some leap forward, the next leap forward, or a world event like a global pandemic for which you're really unprepared. And we've seen the ripple effects, what happens when we're unprepared, like with supply chains, during the pandemic. And so that's what I hope for both the worker and the organization, people who lead the organization, is there is that co-creation process is put in place now, so it continually has the capacity to adapt, no matter what the next, it's called Black Swan event might be.
Well, truly visionary, Gary. I mean, I hope that it's achievable. And, I know there's lots of organizations, ourselves included, that care deeply about trying to help and realize that vision. So yes, let's hope that we're able to get there before the robots do. But yeah, wonderful having you as a guest, Gary. Could have spoken for a lot longer. But yeah, thank you again for your time. It's been really great.
No, Luke, thank you so much. Always a great conversation. So really, really appreciate it. So be well.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. That was great.